They thought they could bury her career with a lie, but they forgot one thing about the United States of America. When the truth comes out in a federal courtroom, it doesn't whisper, it roars. So before we begin, if you believe in justice, in accountability, and in stories that expose corruption at the highest levels, make sure you subscribe right now, because this story will shake you to your core and remind you why the Constitution still matters. It began on a humid Thursday morning in Atlanta, when federal judge Althea Monroe stepped out of her car in the underground garage of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building, unaware that Officer Daniel Harland, a decorated narcotics cop with 15 years on the force, was watching her from a surveillance van across the street, his jaw tight, his phone buzzing with a message that simply read, "Today." Because for weeks he had been nursing a grudge against the woman who had dismantled his biggest drug case in open court, exposing mishandled evidence and unconstitutional searches, humiliating him before prosecutors and reporters alike. And when Judge Monroe had cited precedents set by the Supreme Court of the United States in cases like Supreme Court of the United States rulings on Fourth Amendment protections, she had done so calmly, methodically, without raising her voice, but the sting of her words. Officer Harland, the Constitution is not optional, had echoed in his mind ever since. Harland told himself this wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring order, about teaching an activist judge a lesson. But deep down, he knew the difference between justice and vengeance. And he chose vengeance the night he met with a confidential informant named Rico Valles in a dim parking lot off Interstate 20, sliding a sealed evidence bag across the dashboard and saying, "You were never here." Because inside that bag were 2 ounces of heroin logged months earlier in a raid, heroin that had supposedly been destroyed, heroin that now would be discovered in the trunk of Judge Monroe's car. The plan was simple in theory, but monstrous in execution. Anonymous tip, discreet search, shocking arrest. But plans forged in arrogance rarely survive contact with truth. The following morning, as Judge Monroe prepared for a sentencing hearing involving a major pharmaceutical fraud case, her phone rang, and her security detail informed her that local police needed to speak with her regarding a vehicle issue, a phrase so vague. It barely registered until she saw flashing blue lights reflecting off marble columns in front of the courthouse, and Officer Harland himself stepping out, face solemn, voice rehearsed, explaining that a tip had indicated narcotics trafficking connected to her vehicle. The world seemed to tilt as agents from the Department of Justice looked on in stunned disbelief, while Harland opened the trunk and dramatically lifted the spare tire cover to reveal the evidence bag, sealed, labeled, damning. Gasps rippled across the plaza, reporters' cameras flashed, and within minutes the headline began forming in newsrooms across the country. Federal judge arrested on drug charges. But Judge Monroe did not cry, did not shout, did not plead. She simply said, "You should pray the chain of custody holds." Words that made Harland's stomach tighten because he knew the chain was already broken. She was taken into custody briefly, processed with humiliating efficiency, fingerprints inked, mugshot. Taken, though federal authorities quickly intervened and released her pending investigation. Yet the damage to her reputation spread like wildfire across cable networks and social media. Pundits speculating about corruption, bias, hypocrisy, and for a moment it seemed as though the system she had sworn to uphold was turning on her. Behind closed doors, however, a quiet counteroffensive began as the U.S. Attorney's Office, aware of Judge Monroe's spotless record and decades of public service, initiated an internal review, pulling surveillance footage from the garage, subpoenaing dispatch logs, and scrutinizing Harland's prior cases. And what they found first was a minor discrepancy in the evidence database, a timestamp on the heroin bag that showed it had been checked out for destruction review days before the alleged anonymous tip, signed electronically by Officer Harland. When confronted, he claimed it was a clerical error, a glitch in the system, but digital forensics told a different story, revealing that his login credentials had accessed the evidence locker at 2:13 a.m. on a Sunday, a time no destruction procedures were scheduled, and as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered text messages between Harland and Rico Valles, messages discussing the package and the drop, messages that contradicted Harland's sworn affidavit. Meanwhile, Judge Monroe, temporarily stepping back from the bench to preserve the integrity of ongoing cases, retreated to her home where her husband, retired Air Force Colonel James Monroe, reminded her of every obstacle she had overcome, from graduating at the top of her class at Howard University School of Law to clerking for the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit and eventually being appointed to the federal bench. "They picked the wrong woman," he told her, and she nodded, not with arrogance, but with certainty born of experience. The twist no one saw coming arrived when Rico Valles, fearing he was about to be made the fall guy, walked into the FBI field office with a lawyer and a trembling confession, explaining that Harland had promised to clear outstanding charges in exchange for planting the heroin in the judge's trunk while she was inside a community outreach event days earlier. And security footage from the event parking lot confirmed that Harland's patrol car had circled the area despite no official assignment there. Suddenly, the narrative shifted from scandal to conspiracy, from suspicion of a judge to suspicion of a cop, and the media that had once questioned Monroe's integrity now questioned systemic abuse of power within the police department. As the investigation widened, 3 more cases handled by Harland came under review, and in 2 of them, defendants claimed evidence had been found under similarly convenient circumstances, claims previously dismissed but now re-examined with fresh eyes. A federal grand jury convened, witnesses testified, digital records were projected onto screens, and the portrait that emerged was not of a single lapse in judgment, but of a pattern. Harland manipulating evidence to secure arrests, boosting his statistics, and silencing critics, culminating in the audacious attempt to destroy a federal judge's career. When the indictment was unsealed, it charged him with obstruction of justice, civil rights violations under color of law, evidence tampering, and conspiracy, carrying a potential sentence of 25 years in federal prison. And the courtroom where Judge Monroe once presided became the stage for his arraignment, though she was not on the bench, having recused herself from any involvement, instead watching from a private room as another judge read the charges. The irony was suffocating. Harland standing where defendants he had arrested once stood, hands clasped, eyes darting, hearing the words, "United States versus Daniel Harland," echo through the chamber. Yet even then, he clung to denial, insisting he was being targeted, claiming political motives, painting himself as a victim of judicial overreach. And for a brief moment, public opinion wavered again. Because America loves a redemption story as much as it loves a scandal. The second twist came from within the police department itself, when Sergeant Melissa Grant, Harland's longtime partner, testified under immunity that she had raised concerns about his evidence handling months earlier, but had been warned by superiors to let it go, because Harland's arrest numbers brought federal funding into the department, a revelation that transformed the case from one rogue officer to a potential institutional failure. Congressional representatives demanded hearings, civil rights organizations called for reform, and the Department of Justice launched a broader inquiry into departmental practices. Amid this storm, Judge Monroe returned to the bench after being formally cleared of all wrongdoing, her first public statement brief but powerful. The rule of law is not self-executing. It depends on our courage to defend it. Words that trended nationwide and were quoted in law schools across the country. As Harland's trial approached, prosecutors assembled a mountain of evidence: surveillance clips, metadata logs, financial records showing unexplained deposits coinciding with certain arrests, and Rico Velez's detailed testimony. While the defense attempted to discredit Velez as unreliable, arguing that no direct video showed Harland placing drugs in the trunk. Then came the pivotal moment when a previously unnoticed camera from a private security firm, positioned at an adjacent parking structure, surfaced during discovery, capturing a grainy but unmistakable image of Harland crouching near Judge Monroe's vehicle days before the arrest, his hands slipping beneath the trunk lid for less than 30 seconds before walking away. The courtroom fell silent when the footage played, and even Harland's attorney seemed momentarily stunned. In closing arguments, the prosecutor invoked the very constitution Harland had sworn to uphold, reminding jurors that power without accountability corrodes democracy from within. And after 2 days of deliberation, the verdict was read. Guilty on all major counts. The sentencing hearing drew national attention, activists filling the gallery alongside off-duty officers who felt betrayed. And when the judge pronounced a 23-year federal sentence, just shy of the maximum, citing the calculated nature of the crime and the attempt to undermine public trust in the judiciary, Harland's shoulders slumped as reality replaced bravado. Yet the story did not end there, because in the months that followed, several of his past convictions were overturned, wrongfully imprisoned individuals released, and lawsuits filed against the city led to multi-million-dollar settlements, forcing reforms in evidence handling and oversight. Judge Monroe continued her work, more resolute than ever, presiding over complex cases with the same measured tone, though those who looked closely could see a new steel in her gaze, forged in the fire of betrayal. Years later, law students would study the case not only as a cautionary tale of corruption, but as a testament to resilience, to the idea that even when those entrusted with enforcing the law attempt to weaponize it, The system, imperfect, battered, but enduring, can correct itself when brave individuals refuse to surrender. And somewhere in a federal correctional institution, Daniel Harland would have decades to reflect on the moment he chose revenge over duty, while Judge Althea Monroe's name would become synonymous not with scandal, but with strength. A reminder that in America, the arc of the moral universe may bend slowly, painfully, but when truth is armed with courage, it bends toward justice.